Welcome to the Story Geek Show as part of the Orange Grove 55 Network. Today, Citrus George and I, Disney George and I are talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. What do we think about it? We'll get into some spoiler talk, but we won't start with spoilers. So if you want to just hear what we thought about it from a broader perspective, we'll start there. But then we're going to get into some more spoilery stuff. So those of you who have seen the film can just kind of see what we're discussing and how we're discussing it. And hopefully you will take something away from this conversation, whether it's agreeing with us or disagreeing with us. I haven't talked to George yet about what he thinks about it. So it's going to be totally open to seeing where we net out. But George, why don't you introduce yourself to the folks and tell them where they can find you?
Absolutely. You could find me on Twitter, also on now Thread at Disney George. You could also check me out on a podcast called A Walk with Walt. And of course, you'll find me on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
Nice. I think this is the first time I got the hand motions down.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. My name is Jay Sherer. You can find me at Jay Sherer over on Twitter. And I do the Story Geek Show where we talk about the stories that we love, sometimes the stories that we don't love. We just break them down into, usually it's deeper discussions, but today it's not too deep. We're going to get into we'll probably get into some deeper things, but we may run a whole separate show on digging deeper into Dial of Destiny. But right now, we're just really talking about a review of it. Got to give a shout out to our brothers in crime, OG, who hosts the Orange Nerd Show and who is the captain of the channel, if you will. And also Dre, who does the... What's the name of Dre's show off the top of my head? Oh, Freshly Squeezed. How did I forget Freshly Squeezed? I can't forget Freshly Squeezed. Mr. Vash Sky. Dre hosts that show. So you can catch all of those shows on this network right here, the OG 55 Network. And again, today we are talking about Dial of Destiny. Since it's just you and I, George, and we've never done a podcast. I think I've podcasted with Dre. And I think I've podcasted it with OG by ourselves, but I don't think you and I have had the pleasure yet. So let's do a little zoom in here. We'll just do a little.
There we go.
Zoom in closer so that people can be invited into this conversation.
Absolutely.
So let me hear. Let's start out with most shows. I start out with a scale of 1 to 10 rating. So what is your scale of 1 to 10 rating of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
Mine is, I'm going to say a 6.5.
Okay, 6.5. Can you give me some context to that? Like, what is Raiders? What is Last Crusade?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yeah. Yes. So, what is actually funny, because I meant to join you guys for the Temple of Doom review, and believe it or not, I had spoke to the OG and Dre on the phone, and I had said that Temple of Doom is actually my favorite Indiana Jones, and they were kind of surprised by that, but I had to reiterate what I actually meant by that. And what it is nothing can touch Raiders. Nothing can touch Raiders. I do apologize. That's our we call her Wanda. She's our security system. But Raiders is a film all on its own. Like, you can't touch Raiders for nothing. So that's in a category all its own. So if someone had to say, hey, compare another Indiana Jones movie to Raiders of the Lost Ark, I'm sorry, you can't. So just out of my own personal favorite is Temple of Doom. So, but if I had to rank them, Raiders is still number 1 for me, no matter what, hands down. Then Temple of Doom.
Okay.
And then, I just drew a blank.
Crusade.
Crusade.
I'm assuming you like Crusade better than Crystal Skull.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Last Crusade, Dial of Destiny, and then Crystal Skull.
Okay, cool. So I have a similar order. The only swap is that, so I give 10 out of 10 to Raiders. I totally agree with you. Cannot touch Raiders. But my favorite movie of all time, one of the best movies of all time.
Yes. Raiders
at the top. And then I go Crusade next. That's a 9.75. So 10, 9.75. Then I give Temple, I give a 9. Love Temple. I think Temple's amazing. Then the next one for me, this is where Dial of Destiny comes in. You have it as 6.5. I have Dial of Destiny as either an 8 or an 8.5. I do need to see it again to come up with a solidified kind of number there. And then finally, I actually give Crystal Skull probably a 6 or a 6.5. I need to watch that again too. There are large portions of that movie that I can't stand, but there are also portions of that movie that I quite like a lot.
Right.
So it's just kind of.
And I'm sorry, I forgot to actually give my number. So Raiders, 10 out of 10.
Perfect.
Can't touch it. Temple of Doom, 9 for me, which I think that was yours as well.
That's mine too. Yep.
Last Crusade is not that far from Temple of Doom. So it was an 8.5 for me for Crusade. Okay. Dial of Destiny, obviously, that was my 6.5. And then Crystal Skull was actually a 4 for me.
Oh, that's fair. I think a lot of people would agree with your exact rating. So we're still in the same ballpark. We both put Dial of Destiny in our 4th spot, which is really interesting.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about, you're going into this film. What are your expectations? What are your feelings? Or did you see any spoilers beforehand? Were you up to date with all of this, like Indiana Jones is going to be super woke business that has been out there? Like, tell me about all the things that you went into the film with.
So normally with a film, I always go in, I call it as a blank canvas. And I like to paint that canvas. I swear, every time, folks, that I record, the hype train there it goes right behind.
Yes.
And of course, I don't have the slot because Dre and OG have the mechanics.
The fun play stuff. I don't have that stuff either.
So if I had to do it, it's like, oh no, we must hit that track switch.
Nice. I like your version.
Thank you. But so anyway, so I go into the film completely blank canvas as I'm watching it. Then that's when I start painting it mentally in my head of how I'm going to rate a film. Normally with an Indiana Jones film, it would be, okay, I'm going in this is going to be one big bang, slam, action-packed film, 10 out of 10, no matter what. After seeing Crystal Skull, that kind of dampened it for me moving forward. And then many years later, that this film was put on hold during filming and pre-production and what have you. Spielberg was supposed to direct it, and then it got put on hold again, change of writers, and then Harrison Ford getting injured, and it was like that delayed it more. And people were saying to the joke, okay, he's going to be in his 90s by the time this thing is released. And then, of course, seeing the previews and then hearing some of the comments and the reviews of saying, okay, this is kind of shying away from the original Indiana Jones. Is it going to be that typical woke agenda type of thing? And it's like, okay, here we go. It's like, this is Indiana Jones, folks. This is supposed to be like one of those like radio serial type of action-packed heroes. It's like, why do we have to tie into today's politics and all that stuff? It's like, come on, let's just leave it alone. Right. So I went in there 50-50, as I usually do with any movie. And I wanted to love it. I really did. I like it. I really like it, but I don't love it. And there's certain things, as we'll get into in detail, but normally my thing was the pacing of the film. It was like it hit like certain, like where you got these, okay, action-packed type of scenes, and then it died down. And then it picked back up again. Then it died down. It didn't have a nice flow, cohesiveness where it's like, okay, this is keeping me intrigued. It's like I had moments of the film where it's like, okay, I'm like really watching this. And then it's like, okay, so we got to get through this part again. How long is this going to take, sort of thing.
Right.
And that was one of my biggest problems. Another thing was, again, not to get into too much detail, but there were certain instances with Indiana Jones himself where wasn't the typical indie, I guess I can say. And I'll elaborate on that more when we get into
spoilers.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I had a very similar experience as you did. I have found it impossible, ever since I started the Story Geeks podcast, I have found it impossible to remain like spoiler free, discussion free, because at this point in time, like everybody expects me to watch everything. and of course I can't keep up with it all. But then so I tend to get conversations and hear things from people that tend to get me involved in the discussion, even if I would prefer to just be like, no, you guys talk about it, I don't care. So I went into it knowing about I watched some of the infamous Doomcock videos where he's talking about what was happening with Indy and how it was going to go down. I watched some of those. That was on me for watching it because I was kind of into because I was talking to some people on Twitter who were kind of following that line of thinking, and I'm like, what is going on here? And I just got into it way too much. That was on me. I saw all the reviews coming out of Cannes and the Cannes Film Festival and all the things that were talked about there, which I'm sure we'll get into that. Which I think was a giant mistake.
I was going to say that's like writing off your death sentence for a film. It's like,
I know. It's like we'll take this adventure film to Cannes and see what the art house fans think of it. Yeah. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So that's like taking a rock and roll band and putting them in a coffee shop.
Exactly. It's like the people there are not there for that. Yeah, exactly. And so I went in with a pretty much a very much 50-50 attitude because this is my biggest fandom. I'm a huge fan of Indiana Jones, far and above everything else. Indiana Jones is my jam. But I still went in with I don't know if it's going to be any good because I do respect some of the critics I was hearing from. So let's just see how this plays out. Now I would say that I'm on the border of really liking it and loving it. I'm right on that border. Right. And we'll get into some of the reasons for that in the spoiler discussion. But you and I had a very similar experience. We went in basically thinking, well, we've heard some really bad things. We've heard some decent things, but no one was coming out of it saying it was the best movie of all time. I mean, I didn't hear that from anybody. So I didn't expect it to be like Raiders level. Right. My expectations may have been down a little bit, but the experience for me was still a really positive one, mostly because I love Indiana Jones so much. And I also thought that they handled the reality of the situation about as good as they could have, right? Now we'll get into some specifics. I want to talk about de-aging. I want to talk about special effects. I want to talk about action. I want to talk about the sidekicks and the villains and all that kind of stuff. We're going to get into that stuff, but I'll just say this, going into a movie where you tell me it's not like, Tom Cruise is 60. Okay. Well, he's still doing most of his own stunts and all that kind of stuff. I get it. Harrison Ford is 80 years old. There's no way that he's going to be like how he was in Raiders or how he was in Temple or even how he was in Crystal Skull. He's just the human body is not capable of that at 80. Right. And so I did go in with that as an expectation to a degree. And some of the complaints I've heard online seem to think an 80-year-old should be able to do stuff that an 80-year-old can't do. But it is what it is. So I'll just say this right now. Now you've heard what our rating is, kind of our feelings about it. How we went into the film. If you don't want any spoilers, you should drop off now. We're 13 minutes in. If you don't want any spoilers, bounce now because we're going to get into very much more specifics and jump into the spoiler discussion for Dial of Destiny. So you have 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Now it's spoiler time. So let's break this down, George. You said that there were. Let's start with the pacing. You said you had some pacing issues. Describe some of those issues for me. Where did the movie slow down too much? Where did it speed up too much? You let me know.
Right. So at the very beginning of the film, where it kind of takes you back in time, so to speak, when Indy is at a much younger age. So it kind of sets the tone for the movie moving forward. That I felt was fine. You get this kind of this action-packed runaway train where Indy, has to, escape and what have you, and rescue, his sidekick, what have you, which plays a pivotal part in this story, I might add, even though he doesn't have a big role, but a very significant role, I should add, primarily to the female that we'll talk about character moving forward. But so the start of the film was perfect. I thought it was a nice tone to set the stage. It's whoa, okay, so we may be in for a real treat here. And then many years later, okay, it shows Indy not so young, he's in his apartment building, and everything. His last day at the job, which was fine. Okay, you get it, because you have to set up a story where you have to treat Indy as if he wasn't Indiana Jones anymore. In the character's mind, he's thinking, okay, I don't have to do this anymore. What is my life becoming? And spoiler alert, Shia LaBeouf's character, who played his son in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, actually died in war. Gone.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if that was like a kind of like a little homage to say, okay, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull's dead, so let's just kill the character off.
Right.
But I actually thought it was a nice touch in a sense, because it shows how Indy was vulnerable to something like that, and how it hindered his life, and how it hindered his relationship of his marriage. You know, his marriage was over, what have you. So it kind of played into that story until his goddaughter came into the picture, who was the daughter of the sidekick in the very beginning of. So that part pacing was perfect. It was after the fact of going through the traveling. Oh, and by the way, folks, this is also for the Dial of Destiny, that, you know, to actually get the I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. With the artifact, it's titled the what is it called? It's with an A.
It's like the Antiscara or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I thought I'd have you try, because I'd probably butcher it even more. But this item essentially would take you back in time and to kind of rewrite history. And I think this is where the woke aspect of it was because the villains dealt with the Germans, the Nazis. So it was like they wanted that artifact to go back in time and rewrite history so it would benefit them. And I guess that's where people were kind of saying, oh, okay, well, this is woke, this is this is that. I can understand that to a point, because Indy was always about history. Indy was always about archaeological type of findings and what have you. So they wanted to have something as real as they possibly could. Well, what better villain to have than a Nazi? You know, so it's like, if you had to put your mind in a mind of a Nazi, that's probably what they would do. So whether or not that you would actually agree with it or not, because I'm sorry, they lost the war. So, so it's like, if they had the chance to go back to rewrite history in their favor, that's what they would do. So whether or not you agree with that storyline, if you take that as woke, if you don't take it as woke, I think it was kind of an interesting type of concept for them to take. And I think it's just because the way the world is today, if we were to have that same storyline 10, 15 years ago, people probably wouldn't look at it that way. But because, you know, everyone is so hyped up of saying, well, what is considered woke and what is not considered woke, it's like everyone's going to have an opinion on it no matter what, you know. That part really didn't bother me. I didn't really see this movie as a quote unquote woke movie. I more so had the issues of the pacing itself, where it was like the start and stop between the characters interacting as far as with the sequences. And then I also had mentioned issues with Indy himself. Now, you brought up a great point, that not necessarily of what Harrison could actually do, because obviously I went in there the same as you, 80 years old. I don't expect the guy to be doing back handsprings and jumping off. He's not Tom Cruise, folks, with Mission Impossible. So, and I knew that was going to happen, but my issue was they kind of made him in several sequences of the movie where he had to be rescued. Where he was the one that was kind of like the damsel in distress. But see, for me, he's Indiana Jones. He should have been able to kind of find his way. Now, there's one scene where I do feel like he had to be saved, and that was the underwater scene, because that then set the tone that his goddaughter saved him, to say, okay, she really does care about him. She does have a heart. She's not this kind of runaway fling that's just trying to make money to, you know, to kind of pay back debts or what have you. She has a heart. She does care about Indiana Jones. Otherwise, she would not have gone back to rescue him and save his life under the water of the thousands of eels that were surrounding him, because we all know how Indy feels about snakes. So
right, exactly. I love that moment too, because they're like, it's kind of like a water snake. He's like, what are you saying that for? That was good. That was a good moment. Yeah, I think for me, so so I'll just describe before we get into some of the details about some of the things you brought up. I tend to start out with a movie saying a movie's basically a 10 out of 10 until I start subtracting things that I don't like out of that. And I take a point off, take a point off, take a point off, and I get to whatever rating I have. And we're going to cover Kingdom of the Crystal Skull eventually here on this channel. But so a little bit of a spoiler alert for that show. But again, I said 6.5 out of 10. And it's because I start to take some of the things off that I just don't like about it. And by the way, the fridge is like I'm only taking like half a point or a quarter point off for the fridge. I take a whole point off for like the mutt swinging on vines and swashbuckling from Jeep to Jeep. Like those ridiculous things suspend my disbelief so badly that it's hard for me to get over them. One of the things I talked about in the Temple of Doom show, despite the fact that I love Temple of Doom, I take a point off for the whole raft sequence where they're falling out of the sky in the raft, because it's just so ridiculous that I'm like, Indiana Jones is supposed to be tongue in cheek, but it's not supposed to be a cartoon, right? Like it's supposed to be towing the line with, is it a cartoon or not a cartoon? And sometimes it goes over. And for me, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull went over too many times. I take up some point offs for that. I take some point offs for the fact that I don't think that Indiana Jones in that film is even characterized the right way. Like they characterize him. Yeah, they characterize him as like again, we'll get into this, but he already knows. Indiana Jones is always a skeptic who then learns to believe in something. But the way he shows up is skepticism. But in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he's like, no, I was there when there were alien bodies. Like I helped uncover them. You're like, well, that's not a skeptic. Like he fully believes this already. Like he's not going to learn anything by the end of this movie. Yeah. So those things I felt like this film handled a lot better. Like it still felt like Indy was generally a skeptic. They're like, hey, we got this dial thing. I kept thinking it was called because of DC and where Wonder Woman is from. I kept thinking of calling it the mascara. The mascara. It was like, and I was like, it's not the mascara. It's something else. But the Dial of Destiny itself, I felt like he didn't really believe what it was going to do. I felt like the Mads Mikkelsen character, the Nazi, did believe it was going to take them back in time to these time fissures. I was really nervous about the time travel aspect of it, because time travel aspect gets way out of control. But the way they handled it, where they're like, there's these fissures in time, and if you try, they only appear in certain moments. I felt like, okay, that's cool because it limits what you're able to do, right? Like it limits, like, let's just go back 10 seconds from now and I'll punch him in the face instead or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I actually thought, okay, how are they going to represent this of time travel? Is it going to make like where you see like this huge spiral, like, and you see the people disconfigurating and they're like kind of like teleportating, sort of like how they did in Harry Potter. And it's like, I hope they don't do that. So they did it very subtle, you know, and especially how they had to use the planes and everything. And you kind of go through the clods. That I felt was the best way to transition from one time era to the next.
Exactly. And so now I want to pick up on something that you said. Because overall, I liked the format of how all that went down. One of the things that you said that I thought was really instrumental to this film was, I think Lucasfilm did learn their lesson from the last film, because in the last film, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they were clearly setting up Shia LaBeouf's character Mutt to take on the mantle of Indiana Jones. And we know that because they even sent the signal where his hat was on the ground and Shia LaBeouf goes to pick it up, and then Indy's like, no, I mean, I'm not letting you have that yet. But it was clearly set up as like, maybe they would let Shia LaBeouf take over the mantle. Shia LaBeouf's had his own problems since then. That's not a good idea anymore. So I think there was, to your point that you made earlier, I think this was like let's make sure you guys understand there's no chance that Mutt is taking over the mantle of Indiana Jones. Out of the question. So one of the things that had come up in the rumors were circling about, that I want to ask you about. Tell me about what you thought, because the rumor was Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character, Helena Shaw, was going to take over as Indiana Jones. Now, first question is, did you get that feeling at all in the film? Because that was one of the woke things. It was like, oh, great, we're going to have a female character be Indiana Jones. Did you get the feeling that they were building towards anything like that? And secondly, what did you think about her character overall?
They actually kind of tie in together. I was not a fan of her character. And actually, that's what made me be kind of that moment where it's like, okay, she's not going to take over.
Yeah,
Because it just for me, and nothing against Phoebe's acting. She was, she's a phenomenal actress. It was just the character arc itself. There just felt like there wasn't enough meat and potatoes in that pot that could actually strike me to say, okay, her character can carry a whole entire film for Indiana Jones. I didn't feel that. I felt like her character was very secondary, and just her by herself, the character was very dry. You needed to have Indy with her in order to kind of play off of one another. Otherwise, there wasn't really anything memorable about her character. Not for me, anyways.
Yeah, and I actually, I agree with you. I liked her character, but here's why I liked her character. I wasn't supposed to. No one is telling you when you show up in the theater and you think like, because the rumor was Phoebe Waller-Bridge is going to take over. When you show up in the theater,
and that's why I did that. Exactly. That's why I did that moment. I was like, that was the only reason why I did like her, because they were not pushing for her to take on the hat and whip, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. So I found that a really interesting like criticism, because I'm like her character is literally the opposite of Indiana Jones. From the moment that we've seen Indiana Jones on screen, so I heard somebody saying at one point in time that in Temple of Doom, when Indiana Jones says "Fortune and glory, kid," that was his perspective on how he wanted to treat the Sankara stones. Now, when I watch Temple of Doom, and I think this is pretty obvious to me personally, what Indiana Jones is saying in that moment is that some people are out for fortune and glory, and this is the way that they get it. But when he says that to Short Round, what he's basically saying is he's being facetious. Like, look at us, kid, fortune and glory for us. Like, no, it's the opposite. We're digging through the trenches. We're doing this to help out a small village. In other words, I'm being sarcastic here.
Right. Yeah. Every film that I've ever seen of Indiana Jones, I've never come across where that character was selfish, was greedy, wanted to have kind of like that mercantile type of feeling, like this is mine, it's all mine, I'm keeping it for myself. Indy, I mean, he wanted to put it in a museum in the Smithsonian and put it on display for the history of it. Even when they went back in time, he wanted to stay. He wanted to live the history and be a part of it.
Right.
And so, I mean, so that was very telling just within his character arc of saying, okay, so then when you take Phoebe's character and it's like, yeah, she's the complete polar opposite. It's like, okay, well, how in the world is that going to translate well if she was to become the quote unquote Indiana Jones?
Exactly. So that's what I liked about it, because people thought two things about that character that were simply not true. The first thing they thought was when they heard in the trailer her line about capitalism, like you steal it from them and you steal it from them, that's called capitalism. They thought that she was like criticizing capitalism and saying capitalism's horrible. She was doing that.
She was part of it.
Taking advantage of it.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. She was part of it. So they made her character as the antithesis of Indiana Jones. Like Indiana Jones has always been about what you just said, which is we need to take this and put it in a museum, or we need to take this and give it back to the people who originally were supposed to have it. Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character was literally saying, no, we're going to take it and make money off of it. That's what I'm here to do. It was almost more like it was even worse than Belloc from that perspective. Because Belloc was like, well, I want to know how it works. I want to have a radio to God. That sounds awesome. I want to just play with these toys, But Phoebe Waller-Bridge was like, I don't care about playing with it at all. I'll just sell it to the highest bidder. That's cool with me. And so I think that like that, I agree with you 100%. First of all, I liked her, but I liked that she wasn't likable, meaning that I wanted to root for her as a part of Indiana Jones's team. I did not want to root for her as being above and beyond Indiana Jones. Right. And that was handled perfectly in my opinion.
Yes, I agree.
And so we're in agreement on that. Let's talk about some people have had problems. You brought this up. Some people have had problems with the third act, either whether it's too ridiculous or it's a bold choice for him to go back in time and meet Archimedes.
Mm-hmm.
How did you think that was handled, and did it cause you to have any problems or thoughts that it was negative in any way, shape, or form?
I knew that there was going to be some point in the film, as all Indiana Jones films do. They have these moments where it's like, okay, so there's the realism, and then here's the fictitious part of the story. Because, I mean, are we really going to see this in real life? But that's what I kind of liked about Indiana Jones. Now, of course, there was that level that you said that it could be a little bit too cartoony. But the way that they handled the time travel, they actually showcased it as if what it would really look like if we went back in that time era. And it wasn't until watching the film when they're in the cave in Archimedes' tomb, when they look at the tomb and they say, well, what is it?
Body.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean, like on the coffin, it was the
Oh yeah, they said the Phoenix had
the Phoenix
helicopter
wing.
just,
I was like,
yeah,
the bird.
yeah.
The Phoenix, where it had the propellers, and
Yeah.
I'm like looking at that, I'm like, okay, that's kind of strange. It's like, whatever, okay, didn't really think nothing of it. And then they noticed that Archimedes had a watch.
Right.
Well, that part I kind of understood. It was like, okay, then he proved his theory that he could travel in through time.
Right.
But it never really dawned on me about the Phoenix and the propellers. I didn't really think. But then when they went back in time, and during that time, flying dragons, that they called it, because I mean, planes didn't exist back then, with the propellers. And then as I started watching the scene, I'm thinking, now that makes sense. What they witnessed when they saw Archimedes' body was essentially them reliving, because technically they went back in the past. So here it is, because it kind of already altered their present, because this was something that had to happen by going back into the past for it to happen in the present. So that I thought was a little bit Back to the Future-ish, like it threw that on, but I actually like that. But I don't think it was overly done of them going back in time. I thought it was done really well. As I said, I loved how Indy wanted to stay, because for that brief moment, I'm thinking, oh, is this really how the movie's going to end? Is he going to stay back in time and travel with the history that always intrigued him? Yeah. And I thought, or is he going to change his mind? Is, you know, how? So I liked knowing the unknown. I knew that I didn't know. It didn't have that typical ending where it was like, okay, I know how this is going to end. This is going to end this way. Briefly, it had me there where it was like, okay, I really seriously don't know how this is going to end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I felt the same way. That did not bother me. That whole like time travel aspect of it didn't bother me. And I'll say this, this is not a film. Every other film besides Crystal Skull has dealt with something that I would say was more supernatural than paranormal. So you had the power of God, you had the Sankara stones, and you had the Holy Grail. Those are all religious artifacts to some degree, and so they have a supernatural component to them. I would say that Crystal Skull has more of a paranormal aspect to it. It's like trans-dimensional beings exist, and it's not like they're gods or anything, but some people could have treated them as gods. Okay, I get that. That's like more paranormal. And then this one went back to the paranormal, not the supernatural. So it went to, there's these fissures in time, and mathematics has figured it out. You go through them, and the world is but it still had that sense, a little bit of a sense. So here's my positive about it, and I'm going to say one of the reasons I'm taking the score down a little bit. Positive was I thought that worked out great, that the beats associated were great, but the two areas that I take the film down a notch both occur because of the paranormal element, and not because of the paranormal element, but because of what they did leading up to the paranormal element. So the two negatives are, one, I think James Mangold overall did a fantastic job, but there's one part of the film that I think is inferior to what Steven Spielberg could do. And that is this. Steven Spielberg will shoot things in a way that the audience's emotional reaction is awe. Like, so they'll open up the tomb and see in Raiders, and you'll see the Ark of the Covenant, and it's like this. The music swells from John Williams, and the way that it's shot, the reactions of the characters' faces, where they're like, "Oh my gosh, what is this thing?" That sense of magic that comes through the screen into the audience is unparalleled. Steven Spielberg,
he's the master of that. He's the master of it. I mean, you take a movie. I mean, I know this is kind of way going off, but you take a film like Jaws. I mean, the film that put him on the map. It was what captured audience's attention was two things: the brilliant score of John Williams, literally using two fingers on the piano, and the fact that you could not see the shark, but you were looking as if you were the shark of what the shark was seeing. It was like the unknown. But you knew what was going on. You knew what was going to happen. And it was like that instant cinematic moment, as you just put, like where the music swells in and you just like, you see the connection, as we're talking Indiana Jones, with Harrison Ford and the artifact. And it's like the camera is like right there in between them. Yeah. It's like, I mean, that was the money-making shot right there. And it's like, yes, I agree with you on that 100%. Yeah.
Another area where it happens is when they find the tomb in the catacombs in Crusaders, and Indiana and Harrison Ford gets so excited as he's copying down the shield, and it's like this whole moment where you hear and then it turns right into a chase sequence right after that. Like, all of that is so, like, if you're gonna call anything movie magic, Spielberg is the magician.
It's that build up. It's that build up of anticipation where the music ties with the action of the actor itself. And you're just like, okay, based off how the music is sounding in this moment, something is going to go down, and it's going to go down big.
Exactly. And then you see the reactions of their faces. You're like, there it is. That's the magic. That's it. And I think that, like, Mangold, he's moving so fast that he brings in some creepiness. He brings in some of that kind of stuff, but he doesn't, like, for example, when they open that tomb and they see the body of Archimedes, there should have been that swelling of, like, we just found Archimedes, but it's kind of like,
it's just like, it's just like, yeah, you open it up and it's like, okay, there he is. And it's like, okay.
Exactly. So that's one point I take off the movie, because I'll say it's like maybe 0.75 points I take off the movie. Because the other thing that I take off from the movie is that I know that the star is 80. I believe that the star is 80. However, I'm not sure that I believe you can get shot in the chest just above your heart, and then you can travel back through time in a plane that's crashing. You can be in a plane, like a plane crash where you parachute out. You can do all of those things, and then, like, and I get why they did that, because they needed to have Indy be comfortable with making the decision to stay back in time. And he's kind of like, well, I'll just die.
But I would have done the shot a little bit more.
Yes.
Realistically, where a person could be conscious. If I got shot, God forbid, in that area, I'd be laying on the ground, like dead, like a fish, like unconscious. Like, where am I? Like, I wouldn't be standing up, talking to somebody. Like, I would have maybe like had him like wounded, maybe like a slight concussion, a little bit, maybe, or shot in the shoulder, or something, where,
or shot in the leg where he could maybe
you know what I mean? Yeah, like where he had to kind of like crawl, like, or something of that nature. Yeah, but like when you get shot in the chest, it's like give us something a little bit more realistic, at least for that.
Because I was wondering, because as the audience, what you're wondering is like, is this how Indiana Jones is going to die? Like, is he going to die with Archimedes? And I think that that it was a really good choice to have Helena punch him and have him not die there. I thought it was a really good choice. However, I go, but what you did leading up to that, like, was, and by the way, there's some elements of that again are very. There's a term that we have in storytelling when we talk about stories. Stories should try to avoid coincidence wherever possible. So coincidences are things that, like, oh, we just arrived here and there just happens to be a storm of all the time. There's never foreshadowed that there's going to be a storm. So like, for example, Jurassic Park tells you at the beginning of the film, there's lots of storms that come through here. There's a big one coming through. It's coming in X amount of time. So even though, so our brains go, okay, we know the storm is coming and it's like a coincidence, but there's some movies where the storm just all of a sudden appears for no reason. That was never predicted. It just happened. That's what it felt like to me with like, okay, they're flying in the plane. Indiana Jones is like, wait a minute, guys. You have the calculations wrong. We're not going back to Germany in 1939. We're going back to he goes, we don't know where we're going. And all of a sudden they show up in Archimedes time. I like the way it played out, but it's kind of coincidental because I don't even think Indiana Jones is correct in his math even, right? Like Archimedes seemed to know that the fissures were going to go back to Archimedes time every time that someone went through a fissure.
Right.
And so I thought that was a little bit like, okay, there's a sequence of events getting us to this point, and it feels like there's a lot of coincidences or things that are slightly unbelievable to get us to those moments.
To get us to that point.
Yeah. Did I like the moments? Yeah, I liked the moments. I thought they were cool moments, but it just felt a little bit of, it feels a little bit cheap. Now you could argue, this is a valid argument, that pulp stories have that kind of stuff. And Indiana Jones is technically a pulp story. Right. And I go, okay, you can make that argument and I'm cool. That's why I'm not giving that many points off. It just takes it down a little bit for me. But let's talk. But otherwise, I really enjoyed a lot of the other elements of the film. So I think that, there are some sequences that I would say are weaker than other sequences. Right. I agree with you. The opening sequence is done phenomenally well. For those complaining about the de-aging, and I want to get your opinion on the de-aging, but let me just say what I think about the de-aging real quick. Indiana Jones has historically had some special effects that aren't perfect, and I've never docked them for that, right? Like when you see now I'll dock you if it's unbelievable. But I won't dock you if the special effect isn't perfect. You know what I mean? Like the power of God or the melting faces are actually great special effects. But when you see like a matte painting and it's not the actual place that they were, it's just a matte painting. Sometimes you can tell they're matte paintings. Am I docking you for that? No, that's fine. I don't mind. So what did you think about the de-aging? Was it a problem for you? Did you have any issues with it?
There were some moments like when Harrison would make like certain movements and it's like, whoa, okay, I can kind of see where it was. But it wasn't where like it hindered the movie because I automatically knew, obviously, him being 80 years old, they have to show him at a younger self. Well, how do you do that? They could. And then I know back in those days they used younger actors to play like younger Indiana Jones, like the late great River Phoenix that played young Indy. But of course, like with technology goes, it's like, okay, well, how can we utilize this where we could still use Harrison Ford? And it wasn't like there were some moments where it was like, okay, I can tell this was digitally done. Yeah. But I will have to say it was much better than the CGI that was used in the live action Little Mermaid.
Oh, see, I haven't seen that. So that's an interesting point. So, and what did you think about Little Mermaid overall?
That was, it was okay. It was okay. It was not hyped up to what the anticipation of what the company thought it was going to do. And the CGI for that was a big contributing factor for it. It basically looked like Windows in the 1990s, that very cheesy looking CGI, basically like a cut and paste sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. The only time it really bugged me in Indiana Jones was there was a completely CG character running along the train, top of the train. And I was like, that's so obviously a CG creation. The de-aging, is it perfect? It's not perfect, but come on. It's phenomenal for what it is. I mean, come on, it'll be better someday, but it's phenomenal. So I take it down to an 8 or an 8.5. You've got it all the way down to
6.5.
6.5. So what for you? What were some of the other contributing factors that you go, well, I probably would take a point off for that too?
So I took it to the 6.5 because it was basically for the just speaking with Indiana Jones. What I do is I take the previous films and then I level it to the film that I'm watching now. And it's like, okay, well, how can I compare it to that? And it's like, well, obviously all the issues that I find with Crystal Skull, it's like so much more than what I could ever find in Dial of Destiny. So that's where Dial of Destiny will always be above Crystal Skull. But the three originals, you can't touch no matter what. So it's like, so to that aspect, I feel that when you watch the originals, you can find some relatable aspect to any of the characters, not just Indy, but the people that he's interacting with.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that with this film. I felt that the other characters were very lackluster. The one character that I found so intriguing that I felt like should have had more screen time was Basil. Was his sidekick in the very beginning. I thought that he had a more I would have had more.
He was great.
I would have had a more interesting wanting to know more about him than Helena, to be honest with you. Totally. And it was like, and the boy was okay, the sidekick to Helena, but I mean, like I just felt like he was a fill-in character. Like he was just there, just like, okay, we have to kind of add some extra to the story, but like they briefly said, oh, she met him when he was 10 and he was pickpocketing and that was it. That was the end of his story. It was like it felt like Indy didn't have a connection to the boy.
Not at all. Yeah,
and it was like the boy was just there. And it was like, so it felt like there were characters surrounding Indy, but I just felt like they were just put there just for the sake of just say, okay, we need a character here. We need a character here. We need a character to say this line. We need a character to do this. It wasn't where any other character was memorable that contributed to the journey along with Indy. That to me took a big hit for me as far as the rating goes.
That makes sense. And I think too, like one of the things is I give it like an 8.5. One of the reasons I'm doing that is because it is my favorite franchise. So even just getting to see another film, like I can't take that subjectivity out of it. Now, if you said just be completely objective, I might be able to go like, okay, I can take another point out, right? But like I don't want to because I liked it a lot. So I just enjoyed being in this world, and I was happy with how they handled an 80-year-old Indy because I was worried about that. They didn't try to make him something that he's just not capable of being. The other, and I will say this is, again, I've already taken this part of the point off, but in that conversation about Spielberg and magic moments, I felt like because Mangold handed a film over to, by the way, love Mangold, but because he handed a film over to John Williams that didn't have as many magical moments, John Williams' soundtrack in comparison to the other soundtracks suffers slightly. Those moments aren't there for him to make into these really compelling soaring moments, or even quiet, like tender moments. Like they're not quite there for the soundtrack to work. Now, I do think that the moment at the very end of the film where Marion shows up.
Okay, that actually, I'm very glad you brought that up because I'll let you continue, but I will say that was believe it or not, despite of all the action sequences and everything, that moment for me was the best scene for me that could have ended that whole entire film. And for when Marion showed up and that it actually took back that her and Indy had a moment in the kitchen of their loss of their son, the loss of each other, but yet the rekindle of it. And the best way that I felt like that they could have done it, they did it. And they took it back to the scene of Raiders, but they reversed the role. And it's like, well, where does it hurt? It hurts here. Yeah. It hurts here. It hurts. So, I mean, like that was the perfect way
Yeah.
that I felt like that they could have kind of like put it all wrapped up in a bow, that despite of their moments that, you know, are very lackluster, that to me was the $1 million shot.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was, and I also felt like that worked out really. So one of the things I felt like was when they talked about, oh, they're doing all these reshoots, and again, the spoilers were saying they did all these reshoots because Helena Shaw was going to pick up the hat and become Indiana Jones, and they had to reshoot it all. And I'm like, okay, as somebody who has been involved in filmmaking, when I see what they probably reshot, it was all the little tiny moments of that ending. They probably had a different moment where they didn't do the whole kiss thing. They did probably another moment where maybe she was drinking him under the table. Maybe, in other words, it wasn't like there were major categorical reshoots of like this whole thing has to change. It was probably very minor things of like, how do we draw the most emotion out of the audience? And when we test it, how does the audience respond to that? And I think that you nailed it. That moment is a fantastic ending to the Harrison Ford led Indiana Jones. Like that's what we want out of this kind of movie. And so I think I'm giving the film, again, I'm giving it some credit for the only area wherein this film, I think, gets out of its range of possibilities is in its budget. Other than that, I feel like the movie actually stays within its, we can do this, and if we try to go into this level, we'll ruin it. And it does. It stays in its box. Because sometimes you need to stay in your box. You need to stay in your lane.
Yes.
Because if you get into this other lane, which is what I think Crystal Skull does, it goes, well, we're doing an Indiana Jones movie, so we can do anything that George Lucas is currently interested in. What are you currently interested in, George? Transdimensional beings? Okay, fine. Like, we'll go in that direction. It's like, no. Stay in your box. Stay in your lane. Like, and I feel like this movie stayed in its lane and didn't try to do something that I didn't think it was capable of doing, which would then suspend my disbelief even more. So what else? What else should we talk about with this film?
Well,
What else?
I wouldn't mind diving into actually some of the box office.
Let's do it.
Sort of
yeah,
like,
let's talk about box.
So for me, obviously there was a lot of talks of saying this film was not going to do so hot, just because of everything, you know, and I feel like we are at a point of time just in movie-going cinema experience that streaming is the way it's going right now. And a lot of people, and I think because of the aspects of what happened back in 2020, we are creatures of habit. We were put in a position that it's like, okay, well, we can't actually physically go out to experience this. So we'll bring it to you. And that's where it's like, okay. And then people are like, okay, well, I might have to pay a little bit of an upcharge premium for it, but I get to enjoy it in my own house. I don't have to put out for snacks. I don't have to put out for the movie ticket itself, the gas to drive to the movie theater, like all these things that are in a person's head that I feel like no matter what, there are certain movies. Mission Impossible is going to be one of them. That one I feel like is just going to be phenomenal, and it's going to be taken by just like how Tom Cruise's Maverick did. You know, there's just like certain movies that people will say, okay, I'm going to physically go to the theater to see this. I feel like at a point in time, Indiana Jones was there, but I had this conversation with Dre on the phone, actually while I was at Walt Disney World. And I asked him, I said, how relevant is it for today's audiences that even know Indiana Jones? Like for people like you and me, we grew up with those films. But to the typical young child, teenager growing up now, do they really know Indiana Jones? Do they know Harrison Ford? Do they know the history behind the film franchise when it was done by Steven Spielberg? Do kids even know who Steven Spielberg is? And that's sad to say, but would this film hold its own? And I feel like that was a contributing factor. The fact that I feel like a lot of people, primarily the younger generation, aren't really too familiar with Indiana Jones. Now, if you have kids and you go to the Disney parks and you go on Indiana Jones Adventure, that's because they're going on a kick-ass attraction. You know, do they really know the story behind the ride?
Right.
And I feel like that's where it gets lost in translation. Number two, I mentioned this earlier in the recording that this film took a very long time to get to where it was. I mean, it was greenlit, yellow lit, red lit, back to green light. It was like, and despite of how I feel about Crystal Skull, it came during a time era where, as you had mentioned earlier, Harrison Ford was still a little bit in his older prime where he could still do more. Steven Spielberg was attached to it, and people knew the Indiana Jones name. So it was like, no matter how bad this movie was, it made over 300 million just domestically. I think it was like 317 or something. But now you come to an era where we had the pandemic and the closures and the shutdown tied now with streaming, tied to the generation may not knowing Indiana Jones. I just think that it was released in a time era where it was almost kind of set up to fail. And I hate to say that because, as I said, I love Indiana Jones. I mean, as far as the franchise goes, it's one of the best franchises in movie-going history. I mean, I'm probably going to get a lot of hate email for this, but I actually, to a certain degree, prefer Indiana Jones over Star Wars.
Yeah.
Twitter account blocked. But yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, and then just what's going on with the studios themselves, not even just the Walt Disney Company, but like with Warner Brothers, with and the streaming services, with Netflix, and it's like every studio right now is going through something, and I feel like it's at a pinnacle point where I think no matter how much they were to tackle this film, it was going to take a hit no matter what.
Oh, I totally agree. I think I agree with all the things you said, and just to tack on to that, you know, I think that studios were hoping that the world would snap back to 2019 after the pandemic was over, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that means, because COVID's still going around. But like, I think that they thought, okay, well, we'll just snap back. And, you know, like, speaking of snaps, Thanos was huge, and that made $450 million domestically and $1 billion or whatever it was worldwide. And then, okay, well, we saw Top Gun Maverick, and we saw No Way Home, and we saw Mario. And it's like, yeah, those are the three movies that made a ton, that had big budgets. But if you look across the board, a lot of movies with big budgets are not doing well at all, like, especially this year. So I feel like it's like too much, too fast, following a pandemic, entering a recession. And just people don't have the money, you know? So it's like, I think that studios had this pent-up feeling that they were going to be able to go back to 2019 and everything was going to be fine. And that's just not the truth. We're not in the same world. The consumer demand is not the same. People don't want the same things. Some people have gotten used to watching movies at home, and they have. My neighbor, I've said this before, my neighbor who's a friend of mine, I go over to watch movies at his house because he has the best setup of all time. Like, it's way better than the theater. I'd rather go to his house than the theater any day. And I just think it's one of those things where we're not in the same world anymore. Budgets are shrinking. We can't pay for things. We know that they're going to end up on streaming eventually. And so we just go, you know what? That's not something I'm going to see this week. There are certain breakout things like Top Gun Maverick, Mario, No Way Home, where No Way Home, I think, was the most interesting because we did really feel like at that point, the pandemic was to the point where we could go back to theaters. And so we did, because it was like, we got to get out of the house and do something. Top Gun Maverick, I think, is a different story. I think that was people rallying behind, like, Top Gun Maverick and Mario, to me, are like people saying, we want to be a part of the lexicon. And that's the one thing the lexicon has decided that we should be behind. But if you're not part of that lexicon, if you're not part of the thing that people are like, let's rally behind that thing, I don't think that you have the same amount of possibility. Now, the last thing I'll say about the box office is we are in a time now where it seems like you can't make movies for what they should be made for budget-wise. So let's just go back in time to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark had a $20 million budget. You go, well, Jay, that's 40 years ago. There's no way that it would be $40 million in today's money. Well, guess how much it is in today's money? $66 million. $66 million means you could have made, let's do some math here, $290 million for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. You could have made almost 5 Indiana Jones movies with the budget at today's budget dollars of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
This film was way, especially after what I watched, and after I watched the whole movie entirely from beginning to end, and I'm thinking, how and why did this cost the amount, that the price tag that they're claiming this movie cost? Like, was 3/4 of it Harrison Ford's paycheck? Because I mean, like, it was like, I mean, it was, they had some phenomenal scenes, but it was like, I don't see how this film, I've seen films done much better that cost much less.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, so when you have a price tag of how much this film costs, again, setting up to fail, how can you automatically assume that this is going to be a $2 billion film?
Right.
It's like, I mean, the feat on that is like next to nil. I mean, unless you're James Cameron, when you have a lucky rabbit's foot in your back pocket, no matter what you do, it's like,
yeah, seriously. No, that's another good example of a film that just took off. But again, cultural lexicon, and those, we've had some films too where I think that there's not a very good understanding of the domestic market or the international market. We've entered a scenario where the idea that globalism is going to be the pervading way that we deal with the world economically, and that that's going to continue, is definitely fading from popularity. Not to say that it's over, but now what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot more nationalism. We're seeing a lot more people say, I kind of want to watch the movies that were made for my country, and I'm not going to go watch the movies that were made for other countries. China's not spending like they have in the past on American films. The cultural norms and the culture war is a little bit more global than it is domestic, right? Which means, you know, this is why Disney is taking Finn off of movie posters. So if you take Finn off a movie poster, that's one thing. But if you recast the Little Mermaid as Halle Bailey, is that her name? Halle Bailey.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, fantastic. That's great. Domestically, it'll probably run fantastic. But keep in mind, you had to take Finn, John Boyega's character, off the poster to make it sell in a more biased, racist country,
cultural type of
exactly. And so
how do you do that with the main character? If you remove that off the poster, it's like, you know, you're kind of, again, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Correct. So it almost seems like that there's a misunderstanding of what is available in the international market and what is available in the U.S. market, and yet the budgets for these films are assuming they're going to reach both, and it just doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like that math is playing out in the box office returns, and they're going to need to rethink that. I mean, our friend Alia has been talking about that for a long time. Yes. It seems like a $290 million budget should have been a $125 million budget, right?
Right.
That would have been a much more acceptable play. So I agree with you. I think that there's just the box office is at a different place. It's not even at a place where we can predict what's going to happen.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, you know, and I do wish and hope that films moving forward, and I don't necessarily mean this just for Indiana Jones, but I do feel like the creativity behind these films are somewhat lackluster. I feel like that the creative side need to be, well, more creative. It's like they're trying to aim for a specific audience when, and this is where you kind of go back and forth, where you have the people of the the pro woke or the anti woke. It's like, do we have to label it either way? Can we just make a film for everybody? Keep the agendas out of it, whether you're pro something or anti something. Let's just make a film that is creative and spectacular and that would appease all, that won't lean towards the left or the right. And it's like, unfortunately, we kind of already have those films in the pipeline, and it's like, can we kind of get out of that?
Yeah. So okay, so here, let's end the show with this. Who do you think that this movie? Who do you think should go see this movie if they haven't seen it yet? And who do you think should basically steer clear of it?
I will actually say, believe it or not, and I'm not just pandering it because I did enjoy this film. I feel anybody that loves a good story, that loves adventure, go see this movie. But more importantly, watch the original films first.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar with Indiana Jones, watch them, because I guarantee you, if you are not familiar with them, you're either living under a rock or you were raised not to respect cinematic glory. That watch the original films first. I'd even still say watch Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I mean, it is what it is. It's still part of the franchise, and it still kind of somewhat ties into Indy's character for Dial of Destiny. Then go see this film. As far as the projectile of people, I think it leaned more towards the movie-going people like you and I, but also the people that kind of grew up in the 70s and the 80s, that it was like they want to relive their childhood. And there was an entire row in front of me that there was 9, and I kid you not, 9 friends that came, and they were all in their middle age. They all were like kind of like in their like late 30s, early 40s. And I just looked at them and I thought, these 9 friends came to watch Indiana Jones. And it's like, I kind of can picture them, me going back in the past, no pun intended to the film, of seeing them as teenagers, going on the weekend to go see Raiders of the Lost Ark. So it's like they had to come together as friends to say, hey, we started this franchise together. Now let's end it. In that aspect. So I do have a very high respect for this film, just because this is the last hurrah for Harrison Ford donning the hat and whip. You know, I feel much respect for him. He did everything that he could have possibly done at 80 years old. I give him tremendous. He could probably do some things that I can't do at almost 33, and he's 80. So, I give it to him. So I honestly say, if you enjoy a good movie watching experience, I still say go see this film, but don't see it before watching the originals.
Yeah. I think that's very, very true. I think that's very appropriate. I don't think this is a movie that a lot of kids are going to gravitate towards unless they've already seen all the other films. This is a, like you said, this is a celebration of Harrison Ford making his way out of the role. It's not a celebration of the character of Indiana Jones that we've seen before. It's the character of Indiana Jones that we maybe haven't seen before, but there's moments of us having seen him before. So it's not the same. It's made for people who love Indiana Jones. It's not necessarily made for like, this is a good entry point in Indiana Jones. Like, it's not a good entry point. It's a good exit point, right? Like,
yes.
So I think that that's definitely true. I think this film is also for people who, it's for people who want to go to the cinema to relive a bit of that nostalgia, but also reflect on how we've aged since then. I'm almost a decade older than you. So I've had Indiana Jones in my life for like 9 more years than you have, right? And so for me, that's probably why it's a couple points higher. Not that I like the movies or I'm a bigger fan than you, because I think we're equal level fans. But it means that I'm thinking back to when I was, 8, 9 years old watching Raiders.
Okay. Right. But I was just going to say, so not to showcase your age at all, but I'm just saying, were you old enough? Did you see Raiders in theaters?
No. I was born the year that Raiders came out, so I didn't see Raiders.
Okay, so you didn't see. Okay, yeah. Did you see any of the indie films in theaters?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Yeah. Then that just completely obliterated my point. So,
well, I think the point is still though that like these are.
But I get what you're saying. No, I get what you're saying. Like it would be more for, as you said, we're both equal as far as you know, loving the franchise and what have you. Yeah. But at the same time, you still had more time.
Yes.
To find that extra quality in Indiana Jones than I could. Because if you really think of it, I love Indiana Jones another 10, 15, 20 years, but you will still always have it more than me, you know? So when you I mean, as far as knowing Indiana Jones, like I didn't know you knew Indiana Jones before I knew Indiana Jones. So right. It was like, so. And so when you think of that mentality that the people that are even older than you will even have an even bigger that actually got to see Raiders in theaters.
Yes.
You know, so it's like
my dad, right? Like
exactly.
Yeah. Like, and I think about it too. Like, okay, so I'm 10 years older than you. So that means that I am a little bit, I understand what it means to be a 42-year-old. I don't understand what it means to be an 80-year-old. Right. But 80 is closer to me than it is to you, right? Like, so I can see how it's like I've lost a little in the last 10 years in terms of, you know, whatever I was able to do physically. And so I think that all of us who are aging and can put ourselves in the place of that character. If my dad goes to the theater, which he did, and he liked it a lot, he sees himself as Harrison Ford to a degree that I can't, right? So there's like there's a component of that I think is in this film that's why I say, like, if you're 25, you're probably like, what's the big deal with this old guy? Even if you love Indiana Jones and you've watched the other movies, there's still a component where it's like, I can't relate to that all that much because I can do whatever I want to physically, you know? And I think that there's a component there that's like, it's the same thing with like, the differences with Star Wars, because I am the same as you. I will choose Indiana Jones over Star Wars. If you said you can only watch movies for the rest of your life, which ones do you pick? I go Indiana Jones. Easy. It's not even hard for me to say that. It's like Indiana Jones. That's why I choose. But Star Wars tried to bring in new characters to attract the younger people. They didn't just leave it with like, well, here's Luke and Leia and Han, and that's it. There's no other characters. They went, if we want younger people here, we got to bring in some younger characters. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is not trying to do that. It is not giving you a Finn. It's not giving you a Rey. It's not their story. It is literally 80-year-old Harrison Ford playing Indiana Jones in Indiana Jones' story.
And that's where I feel like kind of dipping off of what you just said with The Force Awakens. And a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of people that prefer the prequels over the sequels. Yep. With The Force Awakens, I think the one thing that anybody can appreciate from The Force Awakens that The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker didn't really necessarily have is Hans, Luke, and Leia on the screen in their entirety after how many years?
Yeah.
So then when you start transitioning off of that, and you have that hype of The Force Awakens, and then you move into The Last Jedi, where it's solely just on Rey and Kylo, it's like, well, we just had that hype of The Force Awakens. We had Han Solo and Chewie piloting the Millennium Falcon again, and then we had Leia reuniting with Han, and then you have Rey at the end connecting with Luke, and then it cuts. It's like, that was cinematic gold in the sense, despite of how you feel about the sequels, despite of how you feel about the story, just having those three in there paid a tribute to any generation that ever stepped foot into that theater with the expectation of knowing, okay, we're going to see Harrison, Carrie, and Mark again as these iconic characters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think we're just playing with a different deck of cards here. And so if you're not interested in an aging Indiana Jones, like if you are willing to say, I'm interested in Indiana Jones closer to the end of his life, then you should see this movie. If you say, I'm not interested in that at all, I'm only interested in a younger Indiana Jones, or if they bring some new characters in that I can relate to, then you probably shouldn't see this movie. It's just, that's what this movie is. Like, it's a celebration of Harrison Ford. Well, George, let's tell the people where they can find you, where they can watch Citrus Corner. Where can people find you and what you're up to?
Absolutely. You could find me on Twitter, and again, also now on Thread at Disney George. You could also check out the podcast I am part of called A Walk with Walt. We dive into a lot of the rich, nostalgic history, not necessarily just behind the company of the Walt Disney Company, but Walt Disney himself. So definitely, please, with a check out that podcast with a lot of hard hitting facts that a lot of people may not know about the man behind Risk and Imagination. And of course, you'll find me here on Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info. And I just have a quick plug for everybody who is watching. Please, if you are in the area in California or Florida or even on the Disney Wish, the Orange Grove 55 crew is hitting the road, and we are hitting Disneyland, Walt Disney World, Disney Cruise Line, Knott's Berry Farm, both coast of Universal. If you are in the area, if you're in the parks, you happen to see us, feel free, please come on over, say hello. I only charge about $5 for autographs, but we're pretty good on that. But I just wanted to let everyone know, don't be shy. We love our fans. We love the community that Mr. Orange Grove 55 has created, and a platform for us to come on and have these kind of discussions, including Mr. Jay Sherer's Story Geeks with Jay as part of the Orange Grove 55 channel. So we really do appreciate it, and I'll pass it along back to you, good sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Be sure to check Citrus Corner, because the trip that George and the fellas are going on is phenomenal. And I'm sure that the trip reports are going to be amazing. So make sure you're subscribed to OG 55, Orange Grove 55 here on YouTube. Definitely follow George over at Disney George on Twitter so that you can see all of his updates that he's doing on this trip. It is a across America trip to all of the coolest theme parks that exist. And I can't wait to hear how you guys do. We're going to have like a cardboard cutout of my face that you guys can take with you for
there we go.
Imagine on there.
There we go.
Yeah, I wish I could go. It sounds amazing,
I was going to say too, but we just couldn't have the real you there. That would have been awesome.
That would have been amazing. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I can get out there maybe next year or something like that, but we'll see. Maybe the end of this year I'll be able to go back to Disneyland. I don't know. But yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Jay Sherer. I'm also on Threads as well, but I'm not doing much there yet. So you may find me, you may not find me. I don't know how. I haven't looked into, because I have a private Instagram channel, so I don't know if that automatically makes my Threads private. I don't think so. I think you can follow me on Threads.
Yeah, I mean, I say I'm on Threads like I actually know what I'm doing on there yet. I don't either. So yeah, I'm trying to make it. So I'm cool. Yeah, I'm on. Yeah. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. Yeah. I'm on Threads. But really, do I really know what I'm doing? Absolutely not.
Well, that makes two of us. So you can follow us if you'd like to. We're always getting into it with the Disney discussions out there. So definitely check us out there, and just be aware that more Story Geek shows are coming. We still have a Last Crusade show to do. We still have a Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to do, and we may even do, if I am able to see it again, we may be able to do a Dial of Destiny Dig Deeper, where we actually talk about some of the intricate story elements and whether or not those resonate with us. That would be a separate discussion other than this just review. So hopefully you enjoyed our spoiler review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And if you didn't, then let us know in the comments down below, and I'm sure we'll have a good discussion about it. But from Disney George and myself, Jay Sherer, the original Story Geek, we will see you on the next show. Bye.